All right, good evening, everybody. So welcome. The first half of this meeting is a workshop. What that means is the council does its business to kind of get ready for a formal meeting. Immediately after our workshop, there will be a formal meeting, so it will be broken into two parts. Again, this part is the workshop or the informal part. It does not involve the public in the process, other than listening, and you're certainly welcome to hear. And then once we finish up that, we'll go straight into our regular meeting, which will include an opportunity for public comments. Just looking around the room, I'm observing 5 council members here: Somali, Justice, George, Wren, and myself. I understand that 6th council member Paloma may be online. If you're there, say hi.
Hi, everyone.
Hey. And then Dan Amar-Blair is excused, so that's our roll call. And then, so we've sort of organized this by topics. Our first one is going to be a housing discussion. We've got John Clark to talk to us about that. Then there is one on a specific conceptual plan related to housing construction, and then the rest gets easier after that. So John, you want to open us up?
And Mayor, I just want to note the city attorney is on remote late too.
I'm sorry. Nick, are you on
Good evening,
remote?
Mayor.
Yeah, sorry. I didn't see the bats, and so I was taken off guard. But now I see them.
Fair enough.
So, hey, John, thank you for being in person. So I think that when we last met, we had talked about 3 areas, and I think, John, you're going to talk about each. One is some potential changes that would affect possibly all zoning, or maybe some particular zones, but not all, things like parking or things that would affect the overall cost of any construction. Second area is maybe some specific changes that would afford easier construction for a particular site, the housing authority who's looking at some things. And those may overlap, don't know. And then the kind of third and kind of separate one was several of us are starting to do some thinking around Route 52 with the departure of one of the auto dealers, and we're thinking if we might actually afford the opportunity to alter our zoning and create some density and maybe a new neighborhood. So those are the topics. You knew that. You're come prepared, so thank you.
All right.
All right.
So first question that was asked of me coming out of the discussion a couple weeks ago was, is there any impediments to smaller size units in the code? And I looked it up. There are a few places, not many, and I don't think they're really what's keeping people from building smaller units, but there are a few in the code that require a certain minimum floor area for unit size. I pointed out there's 4 different places that I found. Artist Live Works require a minimum of 800 square feet. Accessory apartments require a minimum of 200 square feet and a maximum of 1,000. That's hardly a hardship. 200 square feet is pretty small.
Sorry, John, what was the first? I didn't understand what you said.
The Artist Live Work units.
Artist live work.
Yes, require 800 square feet, which is pretty big. You know, if you're a jewelry maker, it's different than if you're a furniture maker or some other more spacious. But it seems to me you could get by without minimum square footage in the Artist Live Work spaces. There isn't a minimum sizes for various size apartments in the Affordable Workforce Housing Law. I'm suggesting that perhaps you leave those in, because those are so that the developer doesn't make super small units for the affordable below market rate housing and then larger units by comparison and make everything seem unfair within the building. So that's the purpose of those, and the sizes are relatively small anyway, so they may be something you want to leave. And then the one that seems most egregious was the Senior Affordable Housing Overlay District, which nobody has used for a long time. But they do have minimum sizes for those, and I don't think those are justifiable, because seniors come in a lot of different variations in terms of assisted living and things like that, and you don't necessarily need to assign minimum unit sizes, I don't think, for that. But again, nobody uses this senior affordable housing overlay anyway, so it's kind of moot. So what I suggest in the memo is that it's not really the code that's limiting people from building smaller units, more affordable units. It's market forces and parking requirements. Market forces are such that people who can afford to rent in a brand-new building, new construction, generally speaking, can afford a one-bedroom or even a two-bedroom, so they can have a home office or have room to grow. So the market replies to that. It's less expensive, or more profitable, I guess I would say, for people to rent larger units. They get higher rents. They are easier to manage because you have fewer units in a building. So there's all sorts of incentives for developers to build larger units. Now, they don't usually build 2 and 3 bedrooms anymore. A lot of them are 1 and 2 bedrooms, but they tend to be larger than what we would consider more affordable size units. The other aspect is parking requirements. So parking requirements are based on the unit count, not on the size of an apartment. And so if you have limited land for a building and a parking lot, you're going to build fewer units because they need fewer parking spaces, which take up a lot of room on a lot. So there's a couple ways you can deal with a smaller unit. I suggest a few. You could eliminate the ones where you can in the artist live work loft, the senior housing overlay district. You could eliminate parking standards for smaller units so that there's an incentive on small lots where there isn't a lot of room for parking. You could have an incentive for a developer not to have to put parking in for either designated affordable housing units or for units under a certain size, and that would encourage them to come below that limit because they would not have to require a parking space, which can be impossible in small lots. So those are sort of the things on the table, and then I put out the, let me just back up to these presentation slides. Here's a couple one-bedroom units that are smaller size. Most one-bedroom units are considered 600, 750 square feet. That's the sort of normal range for market rate units. These are more in the 460 to 420, and they're still respectable size units. Yes, they're not spacious. Yes, they don't have a lot of storage room. They don't have dining room separate, or but they meet the needs of a one-bedroom apartment. And if you're willing to spend less and live with a simpler lifestyle, I think there would be a market for such things. The same can be said for studios or one-bedroom, or if they're small enough, they're considered micro apartments, which is generally speaking under 350 square feet, which is the lower limit that you have in the code for efficiency units or studios. Now, you do butt up against building code, state building codes. There's a minimum. Bruce from the building inspector sent me an email. I asked the questions, and there is a minimum 220 square foot floor space for up to 2 occupants. So that's the sort of bottom line. But most micro apartments are sort of in the 250 to 350 range. So that doesn't. You have to have a separate closet, but there's no minimum size. You have to have certain clearances for kitchens and a separate bathroom. And the real difficulty on smaller units is ADA qualified bathrooms. You have to have a certain turnaround space in a bathroom, and that means you can't have the sort of little tiny bathrooms that when I was young and staying in apartments, you had tiny bathrooms. Mm-hmm. So the ADA bathroom can be something on the order of 50 square feet, which takes out a good chunk of a small apartment. So that's the only constraint, is you have to have a room for either an ADA set-up bathroom or one that can be adapted to an ADA bathroom. So this one could be, you would probably lose the closet in the bathroom if you wanted to put in an ADA qualified bathroom. And then you would have to put smaller closets in other locations in the corner of that bigger room. But you could, for instance, do this size. I did the conceptual layout on the county lot. The first time I did this, I did normal size apartments, and I got something in the neighborhood of 20 apartments on 3 stories.
Hank, do we want to spend a little time on either the parking or the size, or are we ready to jump to the next topic? Or should we, do you want to present it all at once and then have us take
Well, let me
questions?
finish this, and then we can talk about unit sizes.
Okay, that's fine.
And then we can go on to the parking.
Okay, great.
So, so the first time I did this, I came up with about 20 units. That's on 2 upper floors, ground floor commercial, about 10 per floor. And then I set it up instead for micro apartments based on that previous floor plan. And I got close to 40. So you can almost double the amount of units if you put in studios that are designed for single people, young couples, seniors who want to really downsize and live in a more walkable place. So, I'll show a little blow up of it. So, you can, on this corner, if we could convince the county who's interested in possibly setting up a request for proposal or expression of interest for developers to develop this corner and a park in between that and the DMV building. You could perhaps ask them as part of the RFP process to consider a proposal that would involve micro apartments or at least smaller scale apartments that would be inherently more affordable. So you would still get a certain amount of below market rate units based on our code, but all the units could be more affordable if they were smaller and designed to be so. And this parcel is set up for it well because the parking is so inefficient that you can cluster all the parking on the back 2/3 of the property and end up with 21 more spaces than you have now. So that would cover the commercial parking, and you could have, as I point out, you could have car-free buildings. People are doing that around the country now, where they have lease agreements with tenants who don't have cars. And that way, they're even more affordable because you don't have to pay for a parking space or the upkeep of a car. So this was designed.
John, could I ask a question? What controls the density in this zone? And I know it may be different for other zones, but is there a total square footage that you get based on the lot size, or is there a unit density?
It's basically the building envelope. There's no units per acre cap in the Central Main Street District or the Linkage District. It's
Okay.
how many stories you have, how many setbacks you have, and what the parking requirements are. Those are the sort of big 3 variables that
So it's
create-
kind of that's a form-based code in those districts?
Yes.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
So again, here's a building envelope. You could create 20 units or you could create 40 units. The developers who would come in would more likely, if it was a market rate building, want to build 20 units. But if it's sponsored by the county and the city, specifically attracting affordable housing builders who are interested in doing such things and looking for subsidies to help build them and subsidize units, maybe you can convince them to do small scale units, either small 1-bedrooms, small studios, or a combination of both. And here you have enough parking that it doesn't matter if you have 20 units or 40 units because you have excess parking on the back of that lot. And I also showed how the green can be set up to integrate itself with the farmer's market. So each of those blue squares is the size of a market tent. And you could fit 20 market stalls around the green, set it up so the borders are designed to cover that. And then any stalls that need trucks or cars or automobile access could overflow into the back lot on Sundays. You want to stop here and talk about smaller scale units before we go on to parking?
What do y'all think? Want to do parking too, and we'll do them together?
They're kind of related, no? I mean,
Yeah.
if you eliminate the parking, the likelihood that a developer without subsidies would be more inclined to build these micro units or small units, correct?
I don't think they'd be more inclined because I think the market still is more valuable to them at larger units, more luxuries type units. But you could attract developers who are interested in getting subsidized units and doing smaller ones. And there would be the flexibility that you'd be able to provide.
So less disinclined with easing the parking, the minimum parking, right? But not necessarily
Yeah,
enough to make it
I
work.
can't guarantee if you take away
Yeah.
the parking requirements that they're going to build smaller units, but I think there would be at least the option to do that.
Yeah.
I think the biggest problem is market forces and profitability, and so
So why don't you
in order
finish
to
the
do that,
parking
you
piece
have
too?
to court subsidized properties, developers, or kick in public land like on parking lots or something like that, where the city can, as an incentive, can say, we want smaller units as part of the package.
Just to be clear, but so that, it's likely that without subsidies, it wouldn't make financial sense for developers to build micro units.
Well, it does, to a certain degree, depend on the size of the lot and the size of the, configuration, because some buildings are small enough that you'll get 5 units or 4 units, or 2 units or 6 units, depending, and the profitability might work out on certain smaller scale buildings for smaller scale apartments, just because of the nature of the building or the lot. But all things being equal, I think my experience has been developers are more interested in building higher end units if they can get away with it, because that's the least complicated and the easiest to market in a high demand market, the way Beacon is now, with low vacancy rate and the rest, where they don't have to appeal. If you have a big complex, like a lot of, like Edgewater or something like that, then you would probably want to do more of a market mix, because you can't, assume that everybody's going to want a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment. You want to open up the mix. But for most buildings in the Main Street area or in the Linkage District, they're going to be looking at 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, and maybe a couple 3s if they have rooftop units
But on
or
the,
something like
but
that.
on the DMV lot, when they put out the RFP, they can also put criteria for scoring those. And they are willing, the planners at Dutchess County were willing to consider smaller apartments.
Yeah, I would hope that we would be able to work with the county on structuring what we're looking for, and that they would take our interests into consideration, if not full partnership. So,
And I know we said at one point that bottom income level, there was just sort of no way to get at that bottom income level. And I didn't jump in because it's like beating a dead horse over here with supportive housing. But, I keep bringing it up. It does get at that lowest income
Right.
bracket. I think, survivors of domestic violence, their average income is like $20,000 a year often. But I'm wondering, from a planning perspective, if we were to put that forward as something that the council that the city was interested in scoring high for, if the developer had a supportive component, that they would score higher, and that was something that we were all interested in. Can you see any barrier within, for instance, this county lot, to allowing that or recommending that to the county?
Well, you certainly could. And I shouldn't say that it's impossible. We have a developer just proposed
Right, Cross Street.
At 2 Cross Street, frail elderly, because they could get a certain amount of subsidies. So a private developer with the right sort of subsidies can do low-income housing in the Main Street corridor. But it's rare. I think you have to have an enlightened developer and somebody who's maybe looking for capital, extra capital, and this is a way of doing it. But your standard developer, not so much.
But it's sort of where we could put a preference in. Would you see that as a deterring factor?
I wouldn't, but I can't speak for the county in this case. I think the Beacon Housing Authority would be another good option that's been talked about for that, because they have 2 properties that are reasonably centrally located on bus routes, and perhaps could could do some expansion. We're going to talk about that later.
Both and.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The second topic, if we want to move on, is parking minimums. There's been a big push in the planning community to reform outdated parking standards. Most parking standards were done in the 1950s and 60s, and they sort of been passed down without a lot of good justification. If you look at the ITE, which is sort of the industry group that puts out a book that's updated all the time about what parking should be for each type of use. It's based on suburban models, based on very few examples. It's really, I think, not appropriate to go by those standards for the city, but that's the only one out there. And so there's been a big push. There's a fellow named Donald Shoup out of UCLA who put out a 750-page book on parking standards. It was just a revelation to people, talking in scientific detail about what makes parking work and doesn't work, and had called the high cost of free parking. And as a result of that book, it's taken like 20 years baked into the process for people to respond. But now, if you look at this map, something on the order of over 200 communities have reformed their parking standards to eliminate them in either the whole city or sections of the city, most often the central business district of the city, making the case that parking lots destroy walkability. Parking in central areas in particular, there's a lot of street parking available, and you can get by with that. And then if you eliminate minimum parking standards, that requirements that aren't based on good scientific data, then you create flexibility in the market. There's more options for development. And most developers who finance your banks and that sort of thing will still build parking. They won't take advantage of the system, but they'll only build what they need rather than what some arbitrary list says they need. And we've seen that on the planning board in Beacon, how the parking standards don't make sense, even the revised ones for the central Main Street district. The lots are just too small to create parking lots. If you put a parking lot on the parcel that's being rebuilt over on Skank, there would be no building. The parking itself would only create 10 spaces on that building, that lot. So you end up with creating parking lots all over the city center rather than buildings all over the city center, and relying on public parking and street parking to handle the flexibility needed for parking. So the experience with these communities that have eliminated parking standards has been actually pretty good. There hasn't been there's been a couple rollbacks, but usually the two rollbacks that I know of were based on other issues. I think it was, Gainesville, Florida, adopted a form-based code with all sorts of new standards, including no minimums, and a conservative group of candidates ran in the next election against it and then jerked it back. But it was more over the housing in suburban areas than it was about parking standards. But generally speaking, the ones that have done it, and there's been an 8-10 year track record now of communities that have eliminated minimum parking standards, that the results have been no big catastrophe, and more flexibility and more options for infill development in tight locations. So this map shows both the countrywide. The red dots eliminate all minimum parking, and the sort of golden ones are eliminating for the central business district or the main center districts. So you can see most people do it mostly in the central districts, but a significant number, including ones that I included in the memo, locally have eliminated minimum parking standards and haven't had a terrible time of it. Hudson did it in 2019, eliminated all minimum parking standards, just put a one-liner in there that any new development doesn't require minimum parking. And generally speaking, the planning board negotiates with developers, and they come up with a reasonable number based on the size of the lot and the location. And there is an incentive to developers to satisfy their customers and build what they think is adequate. You might get a few freeloaders come along, but generally speaking, it has worked in the places they've tried it. Kingston just adopted it. So, and they went through a 3-year form-based code rewrite of the whole zoning law, and it's very progressive and very out of character for any community in this area, because it's entirely form-based code. It's based on a transit theory of how to do things. It allows a mixture of uses much more flexibly in residential neighborhoods, and they eliminated minimum parking standards. They did institute, and I'll show you this is their entire, this upper part of the screen is the entire table on zoning requirements for parking. So there's no minimums in the Broadway, the Wall Street area, most of the residential neighborhoods, the Rondout area along the only places that have minimums are the shopping center districts, the big plate developed condos and things like that, where there's 150 units already in place. They sort of grandfathered those and left them alone. And then right along the edge of the waterfront between the main road and the waterfront on the Rondout there, because those lots have hardly any room, and so they put some minimums there. They did add minimum bicycle standards as a countervailing requirement in the zoning, but even those are pretty flexible. No minimum requirements for non-residential uses, but suggestions. They do have, and this is a big thing about their code, they have what they call minor site plans and major site plans. And the major ones, which are pretty major, go to the planning board and have a public planning process and that sort of thing. And for those, for single footprints over 10,000 square feet or a total gross floor area that exceeds 50,000 square feet, you have to go through a negotiation process with the planning board for parking. And it involves doing a parking analysis that's specific to your building and your location, and then coming up with a whole list of parking reduction measures that you have to consider, like bicycle parking and transit passes for residents, and things like that that encourage people not to have cars. And that way they whittle down the number of required parking spaces. But as part of site plan, you can negotiate required parking in Kingston. But it is...
Sorry, can you say more what you mean by transit passes? They're paying for their residents to take
Yes.
public transport?
Yes.
Or alternative means?
They pay, instead of building a parking space, which is really expensive and really expensive to maintain, they give them a free pass for transit. Things like that.
On the county bus system.
What's that?
On the county bus system.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I assume. I don't really know what the bus system is in.
Yeah, the county took over the city of Kingston's buses.
Okay.
And I think they've made riding free.
Yeah, isn't Ulster County transportation free?
So
Well,
as
there
of-
you go. then.
Yeah.
Well, then,
People are ahead of themselves. But
definitely more.
they also, they have shared rides, so they have 4 or 5 cars in a big building that you can sign up for and use as part of the tenant package. Or they unbundle the cost of parking. So if you pay for an apartment, it's just for the apartment. And if you want a parking space, you have to pay extra, and they inflate that price as a way of convincing people who don't have cars or have fewer cars to live in that building. There's a whole list of these sort of parking reduction measures that you negotiate with the developer to come up with what the ideal location, number of spaces for that site is on large projects. But for most projects, anything reasonably small on small city lots, no minimums. There's a maximum parking requirement, so you can't have too many parking spaces. But there's even an exemption for that, so you can negotiate with them. And in Kingston, minor site plans are decided by the administrator. There's a planning administrator, and they give approvals. Doesn't go to the planning board. So anything that's relatively minor, and I couldn't find an actual list of what makes something major or minor in the code, so it must be in there somewhere, but I couldn't find it. But that's a real different way of looking at planning and zoning, is you have a planning administrator that you trust to do the right thing, and they make decisions on minor site plans. And that can include 3 and 4 unit apartment buildings in residential neighborhoods. So that's how Kingston is doing it. We don't have any track record yet to see how it's going to work. They did form a parking task force, or they're in the process of doing it. I'm thinking that that was in response to concerns that we want to keep an eye on how things go and monitor parking. But Hudson, for instance, I've been there plenty of time. I don't see a major parking problem in Hudson, and they've had theirs no minimum standards for anything since 2019. So I proposed, or I suggested, different options, sort of a step thing that the council could consider if they're interested in reducing parking standards. One is just to go across the board and reduce them. You know, they're 1950s standards, maybe 1970s, I don't know when they're put in place, but they're antiquated. They're much larger than they need to be. So you could just go through and reduce it, do 2/3 of what's there, or look at other places that have reduced them and gotten away with it. You could do that, and/or you could eliminate the minimum requirements for certain types of uses, like affordable housing units. That would be a good incentive for affordable or smaller scale apartments, so that units under 500 square feet, for instance, would be exempt from parking. That would be an incentive for a developer who's on a small lot to put in smaller units. You could eliminate requirements for specific districts, the way a lot of those golden dots on that map were for the central business district, central Main Street district, or the waterfront development district, where there's 1,400 parking spaces down there. You could eliminate the required parking for the entire district, and that way the rest of the city would be, maintain a certain amount of parking standards, but in the central Main Street district or the waterfront development district, I think those are the two that are the likeliest candidates. They wouldn't have any, and you would just negotiate with developers as part of the site plan review process.
John, I have a quick question.
Sure.
If we were to eliminate requirements where there's accessible street parking and public lots mostly available, if somebody were to just move here in the winter, where would they go when it snows?
Well, usually they go to the public lots, right?
Yeah, those are good.
And they have the right to park in the public lots for a certain amount of time when the streets are clean.
Yeah, we encourage people to move into the lots for the first 24 hours, so we plow the roads, and then they have to leave the lots, and then we plow the lots. But sometimes we plow the lots initially, too, if we need that to allow people to get into it.
Some communities, if you looked at that map again, it would, the green communities, eliminate requirements within so many feet of a regular transit route. So if you consider, the Main Street shuttle to be a regular transit route, they could be eliminated on the corridor from the train station up to the end of Main Street or
East
something
Main,
like that.
yeah.
And that would be an inducement. Those people have access to free transit. They don't need a car. You can get to a grocery store and almost everything you need in Beacon along the Main Street corridor. You can live without a car in Beacon. It's harder in other places where grocery stores are on the outside of Canal. But you can live in Beacon without a car.
Well, I think in some areas, like my ward particularly, is very walkable friendly. Where I live, I live right off of Main Street. But if you're living on the mountain or towards the east side of Main Street, it gets a little harder.
Yes, absolutely. That's why this one was set up to be within so many feet of the Main Street corridor, for instance. So it's not tied to the central Main Street district. It applied to linkage. It would apply to waterfront development. It would apply to central Main Street, but within a quarter mile of the bus route, the free bus route, for instance. That would be another option.
The other concern there seems to be, of course, as we were discussing 2 weeks ago, the city itself doesn't have control over where our transit is. We have influence, of course, but that feels like a concerning piece of the puzzle in my mind. I don't know, John, if you have thoughts about that.
Well, I think it's true. You don't have absolute control over the bus routes. You do have a pretty good working
amount of
relationship, and
influence.
they respond to city needs. But, this is one of 5 options that I put on the table. So if that's a concern, then you might want to just do it for the Central Main Street District and the Waterfront Development District and not tie it to a walking distance.
And John, I think we had talked at a prior meeting that Dutchess County is looking at revamping some of its lines, like the free loop, the G, would essentially become the trolley service that you've envisioned. So it would go basically from Main Street, from the train station up Main Street, around East Main, Leonard,
Yep.
just turn around and come back. And then they would augment the B and the F lines so that you picked up some of the other areas like the Beacon Housing Authority that no longer are on the G route. And then it also augments the buses going out to Fishkill for shopping at Walmart and some of the other stores where, people often need to go.
So, I appreciate your list, but I was on 5 a while ago, which is, I have no idea why they're continuing to impose minimum parking requirements. It's a throwback to like building suburbs and roads, and I don't get it. So I have a very simple solution, which is the Kingston or looks like Burlington example, which is just stop. No minimum requirements, let the planning board sort it out. I don't know where others are, but that's where it's
Yeah.
at.
Now, it does put the planning board in a bit of a spot if you have a recalcitrant developer who now doesn't have a statement in the law that you have to, that person has to abide by. But I think generally speaking,
But the market's going to manage that. I mean, if you don't do it right, you can't sell your stuff,
yes.
right? So, I could see Main Street, I don't want to have any parking, yeah, that's fine. But I think we're going to solve that. I would like to see us solve that a different way, which is if Main Street lots don't have parking, well, then maybe they need to be a contribution to a central parking arrangement, right?
Right.
So,
Related to that, I think all the cities that you listed all do have some form of paid parking or resident permits or some combination of there, including Kingston and Hudson, which is not something that we have by and large. And so I'm curious in your opinion whether you think that's something that should be taken into consideration along with any change in our minimum parking requirements.
Yeah. Well, that's another topic. But,
Well, it's
I will-
connected in terms of
yeah.
it directs people towards how you want them to act in
Right,
terms of parking.
It does manage demand. The book that everybody goes by has essentially 3 big points, and I can't remember all 3 of them, but 2 of them are paid parking that's managed by demand. Eliminate minimum parking requirements, and I'm trying to remember the 3rd. But yes, the theory that goes along with eliminating all minimums works best where you have paid parking that's managing demand. So it's more flexible. In high demand areas, it costs more, and in low demand areas, it costs nothing or much less. So that is an option that you consider, but I think the reason I set it up as sort of 5 options is you could phase it in. You could do it where it makes most sense. You could see how it works and consider, and it doesn't have to automatically go along with paid parking.
yeah, because I view our discussion as about zoning and about imposing costs on putting a unit up, right? Because it comes with parking. Whereas managing parking is just sort of a different issue. I mean, you could eliminate parking requirements and not have any parking problems that would require demand management. You could have a ton of problems that require demand management, and again, you could have parking requirements, right?
And like when they did the Main Street Access report, there were kind of different there was the low-hanging fruit, and we still haven't implemented all of the low-hanging fruit. One of the primary reasons you charge for parking on Main Street is to try to drive that traffic into the lots so that somebody's not sitting in that spot all day. But if you look at our Main Street, it's all posted for 2-hour parking. Now, the enforcement hasn't been as good as I'd like, but we do have the mechanism there. And then we've been picking up additional spots within a block or two of Main Street by doing some of the restriping that John suggested at Eliza Street. We're going to be doing Henry Street in the next few weeks and taking that from parallel parking to diagonal parking. So there is still quite a bit of that low-hanging fruit that we haven't hit yet. You know, look, some of our lots, we've put signs in, but I still don't think people know to park there. Like Digger Phelps lot, I've never seen more than 2 or 3 cars there. Chestnut lot on the weekends is often, you know, sparse. The Henry Street lots as well.
So we have other topics.
Yes.
Any viewpoints before we move on? Again, I'm giving you mine, which is,
Yeah.
it's easy, just to limit
The other
minimum
thing that
parking.
I think is an important point that I make in here is the average cost nowadays of owning and operating and maintaining a car has topped $10,000 a year. So if you're talking about affordable housing, that's $900 a month you can apply to your rent if you don't own a car. And so if you can figure out how to live close to where you work and where you need to shop, and get along without a car, you can subsidize your apartment substantially. $900 a month is a lot of money. It's free food for the year. So in the average budget, that makes a big difference. So if you come up with strategies to allow apartments not to have vehicles and encourage people not to have vehicles, it's a naturally occurring way of creating more affordable apartments.
Yeah, I personally really like the idea of the shared car services, and I know that I think Ithaca has tried a municipal model, at least a model that was nonprofit that I think, I don't know if it's even currently going, but just as a way to get us from where we are to the future. I think that the reality is a lot of places people want to visit, they either does require a car, or people have the idea that it does. So to give them a way to experience, you don't need to own a car that is just yours. And what's a way of the city that we can support that? To your question, Lee, I'm also fine with the citywide approach, at least at this current point in time. My one question is that I also want to encourage smaller units and affordable housing, and so if there's a way that we can direct developers towards that by offering reduced or the elimination of parking minimums in certain places but not others, it could actually drive us towards the development that we want. So that's the one thing that I'm thinking about and weighing in what we want to do in the short term.
Others before we go on? And we'll come back, and we don't have to have the answers, right?
I mean, whatever we do end up determining, it could be revisited as, you know, Kingston, I'm sure, will be looking at this and looking at, when you take these radical approaches and departing from a 50-year, you know, policy,
Yeah.
you have to constantly review it and see how it's working and see where it needs tweaking.
So the third issue that I was asked to look at was the Beacon Housing Authority, and I haven't talked to them, so this is sort of off just the top of my head. I don't know what their plans are. I'm not speaking for them. I don't have any insight knowledge about what their plans are. Just from what I've read in the paper and what I've heard talked about is they're interested in providing housing that is subsidized that would fit into that category of the lowest quintile. And there's a few options that I thought I'd just look at. The first one, they own 2 properties in Beacon, the Hamilton Fish Plaza up on Fishkill Avenue, really fronts on Eliza, but people recognize it from Fishkill Avenue. It's shown on the screen here. It's a 1.5 acre site. It has 70 apartments, 2 and 3 stories. It doesn't have a lot of parking, but it has enough parking that apparently it handles it because they have room for more and they haven't built it. So that means that the people who live there don't use a lot of cars because it doesn't appear to have a spot for every unit. So there's an an indication that at least this type of tenant doesn't need 1 car per unit or 2 car per units that are in the minimum standards. There isn't much room to develop on this site. It's surrounded by single-family homes. You could build a building on the rear parking lot and have under-building parking, but then you only get 2 stories out of it. It's not something I would think would be worth the money to create a limited number of units. And then you would probably get complaints from all the neighbors about building a 3-story building on the property line. I looked at the parcel across the street. This isn't owned by them, so this is purely conjecture. I have no idea who owns that or what their plans are, but it's been vacant for a long time. It's in the same zoning district, so it's zoned for multifamily housing. So it's 1.2 acres. It's got an existing building on it that looks capable of being rehabbed. I've never been inside of it. Under the current zoning, you could only fit 10 units on this property, which is not very much. If you moved it to the T district, it would be 20 units. If you moved it to an RD 1.5, which would be more consistent with what the Hamilton Fish is, it's even less. And consistent with what you allow in the general business district, for instance, 1,500 square foot per unit, you could fit 34 units on it, which would combined between the 2 buildings look something like that with rear parking lot. So, if this property was available and the Beacon Housing Authority was interested or had the financing to buy property, this might be a way of expanding, and the only way that it would work is if you change the zoning to something like the an RD 1.5, which you don't have in the code right now. The lowest district is RD 1.7, which is what Edgewater is.
Well, 1.7 is not a mile off from 1.5. It's at least in the ballpark, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I said, you allow that in other places in the city. In the general business district, you can put your 1,500 square foot. So it's not like unheard of. And for senior housing or subsidized housing with smaller units, this might be a good location to think about. It's directly across the street.
We had a zone that we retired in RMF 1.5, right? It
Yeah,
was a residential multifamily 1.5.
Yeah, that was sort of gone by the time I got here, but
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know, I can't remember exactly what the standards were.
Yep. And I'll go look for it.
But you could still keep the 35-foot limit and things like that. You just allow fewer parking spaces and more units on a pretty good-sized parcel in walking distance of Main Street and surrounded by, not single-family homes, so the neighbors' reactions might not be as severe. The big property is down off Walcott. It's 175 units, 70 in a 9-story building, and the rest in 1- and 2-story walk-ins that are clustered randomly around the site, it looks like. They have dead-end parking lots, which is not always helpful in terms of circulation and emergency access. So again, I don't have any inside information about what they might be thinking, but if it was me, if they were asking me, I would say there's 2 options. One is to build on existing parking lots. You probably have more parking than you need, or you could build over a parking lot. There is a 10-story limit in this district, so you could put a pretty substantial building on if you wanted to. I don't think maybe anybody's talking about that. But you could put Sam Mid-Rise building, a 4-story building or a 5-story building on 1 or 2 of those parking lots.
I think they've been exploring a 4 because above 4 you have to go to different materials for your structure.
Yes, yeah, usually that's the limit. You can go to 5 if you fireproof the ground level. And a lot of times you have underbuilding parking, so you'd want to do that anyway. And so you build 4 stick-built above a one-story podium for parking.
And on your map, the two parking lots I know that they've been talking to developers about are the ones on the east side by Deanan Street, and then on the north side, that longer lot that runs along West Center.
Yeah, I would have a little harder time, because I think those are up against single-family neighborhoods. And they, I think it would be better to front on Walcott than it would be on Center Street.
John, do they have HUD contracts that limit their ability to get rid of parking?
I have no idea.
I think they just have to abide by the affordability.
Most of the time, my assumption would be they only have to abide by local zoning, but I don't know. So these were the two options that I put on the table. Building over the main two parking lots that front on Walcott. And so you would be able to pull underneath and put 4 stories above that. One building would overlook the park, and the other one would be next to the Housing Authority office building. I would also suggest you think about the idea of putting a street connector through the center of the property so that you don't have dead-end parking lots and you have some emergency access to the middle of the property. I think you could do that, and you could put some on-street parking along that so that you have more of a, street front block situation, more traditional, the way the rest of the city looks, rather than having this oddball cluster of kitty corner buildings that are all different angles. That's not the way the city usually builds. So most people who have redeveloped come up with different schemes to add buildings to housing developments that were built in the 70s, or I'm not sure when this was built, but I sort of assume the 70s. Do talk about having more street access, so there's more options for interior surveillance, better emergency access, on-street parking rather than in parking lots, those sorts of advantages you get. Because of this layout, I couldn't find another location where you could break this mass up because they're at such strange angles, but that would be something I would suggest they think about. And so you could have a 4-story building on a 1-story podium, which would replace the existing parking, and then use the existing lots connected by a street to allow circulation between the parking lot and the new buildings or the existing buildings. Again, the zoning is 1.8, which allows 192 units, so you only get 17 more units if you leave the zoning the way it is now. So again, I suggested you think about doing it to a 1.5, so therefore you could get up to, I think, 56 more units, which would be a decent sized number of units for a 4-story building. But, you could think about multiple buildings. You could also replace some of the 1- and 2-story buildings with mid-rise buildings, which, involves displacement and that sort of thing. So it's a little harder to imagine happening, but it's also a possibility. You end up with a net higher number of units, which I think is the goal, is to provide more units so that there's more opportunity for people who are in the lowest income brackets.
Other possibilities for this site in terms of zoning changes that we could help?
Well, again, the two impediments to developing this site with any more housing is you'd have to change the zone to something that allows a little bit more development potential, and then you would also have to eliminate or reduce the parking standards.
Yeah.
Because I'm
and
sure that
perhaps
this...
setbacks?
You may need that. It doesn't have bad setbacks, but that you are trying to cut things into small lots. Into small building envelopes. It depends on, I didn't want to get into too much detail because I have no idea what's on their mind, the Housing Authority.
Yeah, no, I appreciate this because my reactions to this is, One, going from 1.8, so for the public, the R stands for residential. The next letter would probably indicate something lower. It's multifamily as opposed to single family.
Design residential is what
Right,
it's
so
called,
RD
which
or
allows
RMF.
multifamily.
And then the number that follows that is the number of square feet in thousands per dwelling unit. So when we say R something 5, that means 1 unit per 5,000 square feet. There's only 8 of those in an acre. That's what you'd get out of 5,000 square feet. But 1.5 would be 1 unit per 1,500 square feet of the lot, right? And so it's at 1.8, that's 1,800. So it's not a dramatic reduction, but you're saying going to 1.5, 1,500 square feet per unit would allow probably another building with some ease, right?
Yes.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay. And then, yeah, the setbacks issue, Chris, I think the only place where the setback issue would get
In the parking lots.
is if they wanted to build in the parking lots, then there might be a setback
And
issue.
that is what they're looking for, because there's a really nice canopy of trees in between that kind of creates a natural block.
On the back-
The other thing is, in the center of their property, they have some beautiful mature trees that are 40 and 50 years old that are just, it'd be heartbreaking to see a road go through some of those areas.
Well, I only saw one tree that would have to be lost if that road went on, but I was working off aerial, so I might be wrong. But if you put the buildings on the rear parking lots, they're not only right up against single-family neighborhoods, but they're also, you have to build them at the end of the dead end. So they're sort of removed from the street system in terms of walkability and that sort of thing, because you can't put them at the beginning, because then they would block access to the rest of the parking. So, I'm certainly willing to court any possibility, but that was my suggestion, looking at the aerials and the configuration of the current layout.
Mhm. Any input from council? I'm just kind of talking through ideas.
Just thank you, John, for confirming and clarifying what role the city could potentially play in supporting further development here.
Anything else?
Yeah. So again, I'd be interested in seeing us alter the zone into the 1.5 that you're suggesting. That was sort of my target as well. I think the citywide elimination of minimum parking standards, it would be an easy fit here. This is, a customer base that doesn't use a lot of cars already. I think that makes a lot of sense. As for the rest, it really would depend on what they're thinking, but the setbacks might be of relevance too, so we might want to think about that, because I think Chris is right. They're sort of looking at parking lots right now, and that might be the third.
The last question that I was asked to look at was the Fishkill Creek, Fishkill Avenue corridor. And, if you go out there, it's pretty sad. It was sad already when there was 1,000 cars parked right up against the sidewalk, but now it's even worse because you have complete empty asphalt up against everything. It's starting to look pretty barren in some of those car lots. And I've heard through car dealers that the model has completely changed about how, and maybe, it was instituted during the pandemic, and maybe it's going to be a permanent model now with competition from Carvana and online-based dealers, that you order your car, you have a showroom, but you don't have a huge lot. And you don't go out there with a huge inventory to pick from. You order your stuff based on options online, and they ship it to you in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever they can manage. And so the sort of dealers that are lining Fishkill Avenue may not be there very much longer. I don't know. But there has been rumors that these lots out here may be open for other options. And, what the current zoning is, light industrial or general business, has no design standards So by default, you can do almost anything there. And the planning board, in spite of their best intentions, would have a hard time convincing you couldn't do front yard parking or, limited landscaping or the rest of it. Drive-through windows, whatever. Now, maybe you need a spot for that, and this is the spot in the city. But there has been at least some talk about, and there was one building that's come before the planning board that has used a Main Street model rather than a general business model as a way of building, and I'll show you that in a second. But I just wanted to sort of look, this is what's existing. It's sort of a hodgepodge of different districts. And you can see what they look like. I'm sure everybody's familiar. There are a couple remnant buildings that were there from before the car dealers and the strip development happening. So you can see that one brick building at the north end of the GB district. It has a nice brick wall, the shielded side yard parking lot. You also get an idea, now that the MTA rail line is going away and it's going to turn into a rail trail, and that seems pretty imminent, or at least inevitable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not sure how
It's
imminent,
coming, right? Don't know when, but it's coming.
Yes. So if you look at it, it may change the attitude, because all those properties along the east, southeast side of Fishkill Avenue will now have creekfront and rail trail frontage. And so they'll look sort of like this middle picture on the right, where you see the rail trail and the creek. And so those properties in particular, I think, would be much better suited for mixed use, sensitively designed building and parking arrangement, rather than a sort of standard strip development along there with car-oriented uses backed up to a rail trail and a creek. So I was asked to think about what could happen here if you were thinking about an alternative design scheme or a zoning change. And this is a suggestion. So here's the building that was approved already and is going to be built at the corner of Conklin Street. It was designed by somebody who is familiar with Central Main Street and other building. And they came in with a really nice design with all the parking clustered to the rear. A 2- and 3-story building, consistent with sort of the way buildings in Beacon look, and put in street trees and all the rest of it. You can see by the site plan here that it still has, more parking than building, because they met the building requirement, the parking requirement. So that may be able to be tamed if you, for instance, there was actually quite a few on-street parking spaces that are never used along Conklin Street that could have been negotiated to lower the number of required parking in the back and allowed more landscaping, for instance. But they provided everything that satisfied the code. They did it right. They put the building in front, the parking in back, landscaping, sitting area for tenants, the rest of it. But there's no guarantee the next developer isn't going to put in a
McDonald's.
Big Mac,
Yeah.
Burger King drive-through with a lot of parking around it. Or another, dollar store or whatever. So if the city wants to rethink this area, and particularly based on the fact that it's going to now have new sidewalks, hopefully new street trees, and a rail trail right-of-way with creek access along its entire length, you could combine the existing zoning into a Fishkill Avenue zoning district and set up design standards and parking requirements and landscaping requirements and architectural standards that are similar to the Linkage District or the Central Main Street District or whatever district you wanted to start building off of.
What
Wouldn't be
about
the same.
environmental?
What's that?
What about environmental, just to
Yes.
protect the watershed at the creek?
Sure. I mean, you have that anyway, but under the seeker standards, we can.
Do
planning
more.
board would look at that.
Yeah.
But it's easier to do if you have design standards that say this is how you have to build in order to be sensitive to the rail trail in the creek.
Yeah, I think about things like lighting, for instance.
Absolutely.
You know, it's just, a little goes a long way to
Yes.
change it for the fish. Yeah.
So this would include the general business district on the north, some of the light industrial district down towards Memorial Park, and the heavy industrial district, which is the rail trail
Rail
corridor. And it wouldn't be that difficult to put together because you would pick the best standards that are already part of the Central Main Street and linkage districts and just replicate them out here. Now, the question is, do you still want a place in the city for gas stations or car washes or whatever? I left some light industrial district down on the southern end where the Meineke place is, and, well, not the Meineke, the Talex complex is, that what former Talex complex, but you could leave some more of the, you know, at the fringes for, you know, if you thought that you'd still needed a place for auto-oriented stuff. But those are sort of the choices on the table. If you want to do something different for this district before it turns into more of the same. And you lose the opportunity for when these car dealers go out of business that they can be retrofitted into something that looks more like the city and less like Route 9 South. I mean, Route 9 South looks a lot better than this section, to tell you the truth, in most places.
You really know how to hurt about it.
John, do you have any thoughts about parking in this area? If we did allow sort of denser Main Street-like buildings, sort of how we should think about parking? I don't know if Fishkill Avenue itself is wide enough to take parking even on one side, or if it's more about side streets or just having parking lots in the back.
Yeah, I think that you'd have to think about that. I mean, if you wanted to eliminate them, you could, but you would likely have spillovers on side streets, and there are not a lot of side streets in this neighborhood. And I don't think, I haven't looked at the plan since I thought about this, but the Fishkill Avenue Rehabilitation Plan does not envision on-street parking.
No, but we've truncated the Fishkill Avenue project to stop at Memorial Park.
So you still have the option.
Yeah, so we can rethink this area, and so we've done a couple things. We've rejected the bids that came in this spring that were $5 million over budget. We have the engineer going back and doing all of Teller, all of Fishkill to Blackburn, and we're seeing how much project we can buy out of that, and we're going to rebid that this fall.
Okay.
The council then put in money for sewer replacement along Fishkill Avenue for that next section going towards the town. And then we thought at some point we'd come back and we'd use our state touring money and our CHIPS to repave it. And then we'd look for other money for the sidewalks. So we're going to stop the Fishkill-Teller Avenue project at Blackburn, and this can still be in play for a realignment of that roadway. We don't have to go with the original plans, and DOT will be extricated from that piece of it.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Huh. Well, then, you know, then you could build on-street parking as part of the mix, and that would replace a lot of the need for parking lot, specifically on the side next to the creek where you don't want to have parking between the buildings and the creek. And you don't want to have front yard parking either, so it always becomes tougher on, so you might have different standards on the east side of Fishkill than you do on the west side where there's more room for parking.
And we really didn't have the play to do that before because they parked the cars right up to the curb line, and they didn't even want the curb line.
Yes.
The
Yes.
stripe was all they would have.
Well, we put a curb, but they weren't happy about it.
So, you know, this picture in the right-hand side of the site plan is just a travesty because of the amount of parking that's taking up on the lot. I mean, just look at it, it's just awful. And it's like, we need to fix this now, is when I see that. Because you're telling me if we had eliminated the parking standards, one, it would either be more units, which would be a good thing, or there'd be more landscaping. And it's just like, what a disaster. So I look at that and say, we're already late. and I'd like to get it fixed. And again, I still go back to, I don't see why we have this minimum requirement at all. But the other thing I look at is, oh, on this street, there isn't housing directly behind the Main Street buildings. In other words, whatever's on 52 is very different than what we put on our Main Street. Our Main Street goes immediately down to single-family homes right next to it, which, you know, kind of puts reasons for us to have height limitations. I don't know what the right height is. A 4 wouldn't have hurt at all in this site, because look what's next to it. So I'm just saying, I don't know the answer, but I think that there's a more of a blank easel here for us to work with, canvas, in terms of designing. I mean, if you said if we did on-street parking, well, maybe that means we're just going to alter the speed at which people come in and slow them down a little bit, and we want them to come to our shops. And boy, there's lots of possibilities. I don't know the answers. I'm just throwing out ideas that we may want to think about in the process. Other than parking, it's really obvious for that picture. We've got the parking wrong. So
That's current parking standards. And in the GB district, they're the old parking standards. They're not the more reduced parking standards that you see in the Central Main Street or Linkage district. Yes, I think those are the questions on the table. I think there are houses that back up against the GB district.
Yeah.
But, for instance, at the northern end, you could put higher height limits because it backs up against the chemical manufacturer.
yeah.
You could put higher ones along the creek so that there's better views of the mountains. And a lot of this is because, you know, it's trail right-of-way, so you're not going to get, but I would think that if you can redesign that corridor to allow on-street parking on both sides, it would make a huge difference in terms of being allowed to do minimum parking requirements that are either way down or non-existent for certain areas.
John, can you help me understand what leverage we might have to incentivize things like grocery stores or laundromats or other sort of day-to-day life use industries in this area? Or is that just purely commercial and we just have to
Yeah, there's just
ask the market to do it?
general retail, you know, it's hard through zoning to, I think it's impossible to zoning to, unless you create a specific shopping center district with only limited uses allowed, like a grocery store, pharmacy, and whatever.
There is a laundromat
Yeah,
already.
and the grocery store.
On this road?
Long gone.
Yep.
Yeah.
But the other way to do it is,
Reopened?
It's open, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
so it's hard to do through zoning, except that I would say that if you allow a strong residential base to develop there, then the services will follow. If you have, you know, 1,000 people who live in this corridor, or whatever number, there's going to be a laundromat that comes to that neighborhood. And the same you could say for a grocery store or some sort of food outlets, because commercial follows residential. And so right now it's a drivable corridor. The only things that exist out there are things you drive to. And even most of them you only drive to once in a while because, you know, you don't need a car every weekend.
We also don't want to zone it so that those are not options going forward. You know, a supermarket and parking and stuff.
Yes, yeah. But, you know, in areas where you allow mixed-use development, grocery stores have gone in, if there's enough demand, on ground floors of larger scale buildings.
And if you had a road that poured into this section with some housing that was feeding into it, that would only encourage the activity that we want.
Right.
Yeah.
John, would you include the Kempren property so that the front of that property could be redeveloped?
I always assumed that that was a good spot for job creation types of buildings
Okay.
to be built. I mean, I don't know why that company hasn't marketed
yeah.
the front of their property yet. And because they have enough room, the setbacks are not large in the light industrial district. So you could, I did a build out on that property. It was like 100,000 square feet or something. You could fit it on the front of that property if you had a 2-story building with, and it goes up a hill so you could have access from different levels. It just seems, and you could turn it into mixed-use development. Or you could leave it the way it is and encourage the owner to bring in job creation type uses that would be walkable to this area.
I'm just wondering if there's something about what they're making there that could keep them from wanting to have housing on top of their land?
I've never heard of any complaints about that
We have a
property,
smell, for
but
sure.
I
I don't know if it's coming from there, but,
but I'm not sure what they make in there. I don't know.
yeah, I think there's definitely some emissions of some kind.
Yeah. Well, that might be a better reason to leave it industrial on the front end rather than mixed use, but it depends also, there's been talk about trying to convince the state to open up some of the state land south of the prison for industrial type uses. And so if you can rezone that area for industrial and have an access road over Mattawan, then the frontage could become more flexible, for instance.
So any other input? Because I would suggest a set of to-dos for John as next step, if that's okay. I would suggest that he comes back with, sort of what's the process for us to do here, and what might be kind of target, sort of high-level components of the zone. Maybe that just means you're picking the best bits of our form-based, components. But I would say, we would move forward. There's something conceptual in this area. It doesn't have to be fully formed. And then just working, kind of backwards, I would suggest, if it's okay with folks, that we come back with a proposal affecting the zoning on the housing authority lots. And I kind of heard us talk about the zone itself, possibly going down to R15, thinking about parking, although, again, I would propose that citywide, and then also setback concerns. And maybe to have a conversation with them as the next step of, would something like this help, or do you have other things in mind? So maybe it's a two-way conversation. And then on parking and small units, I would suggest that we, make a proposal for consideration. And you know where I sit, which is just eliminate it citywide and see what happens.
With the county lot, is there any further information about their timeline for when they're hoping to do an RFP or RFQ? Nothing yet? Okay, great.
And I do expect that if the housing authority wants to move forward on something, they'll come back to us this fall. So we might want to hold fire on that till we understand what what they're looking to do.
Yeah, or maybe what we do is we generate a memo of kind of our thoughts, and then we kind of hold that for a while and wait.
Mayor, would it be okay if John also looked at the environmental concerns that I brought up for that Fishkill district as well on the outset?
Yeah, absolutely, because, the Fishkill Creek Development Zone has a set of those that you could pick and choose what would make sense, right? Because it is along the creek.
Yeah, I think that our Ward 3 constituents would want to see what we have now and then how we could step it up a few notches if we were expecting more development in the area. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, the other thing is that that's an area where the rail trail actually may simplify, sort of our long-term greenway thinking, right? Because we're slowly kind of building pieces of it, and it's like, ooh, what a gift, directly adjacent to it, right? So then we may want to kind of think through that component as well in how we do this.
Yeah, the current Greenway Trail has been built piecemeal because it's been built by developers as development happens. So it's not, this would theoretically, if the funding was there, come in one big swath. And you would have a link all the way through the city. That would be a terrific asset for, circulation down to the train station and along the whole creek corridor, and for bikes and walkers as well. And, Beacon really needs bike routes, designated bike routes, and this would be sort of number one bike route, I would think.
Yeah.
As it goes right to Main Street from the north end to the south end. So, and it would provide a buffer, that rail trail provides that sort of buffer between the development and the creek, so it automatically creates sort of a stopping point, so that development can't happen right along Creekside, which has been a problem with some of the other sites that are along the creek, is the developer wants to be as close to the creek as possible. This way, there's always going to be a 40-foot right-of-way or whatever that's publicly owned between development and the creek in that corridor. Just reducing impermeable surfaces in there from all those car lots would be a big help.
Yeah. So is that generally okay? Again, details won't be so fleshed out that they can't be worked as a group, but at least to start to kind of conceptually put down something to work with. All right? Okay.
Thank you, John.
Okay.
John's on this next agenda item.
So 8:20, but the next item's going to take us a little while, and it's directly related to this. So there's a discussion on hip lofts and sort of a concept plan on the next piece of their puzzle. Nick, are you going to introduce this, or are you're going to come and talk to us?
Nick was going to.
I am, Mayor. I'm happy to kick off this discussion and provide just an overview of the project and also the council's role, and then see if Ari just wants to put the plans up on the screen and walk you through the plans and give you a brief overview of any items he thinks I may have missed, and certainly from John as well. But let me kick it off and see if I can cover 95, if not 100% of this. So the council may recall it previously reviewed the Hip Lofts project for a concept plan review back in August. And this project concerns an existing 3.5-acre vacant parcel adjacent to the previously developed Beacon Lofts project located off of Fishkill Avenue along the Fishkill Creek. And you referred this to the planning board, the city planning board, for a review and report with respect to the concept plan, and also for them to be the lead agency under the State Environmental Quality Review Act, SECRA, so they could make a determination of significance. The planning board reviewed this project at several meetings starting in September and concluding in June, and issued a determination of significance with the adoption of what's called a negative declaration, which is a 10 or 12 page document going through various environmental findings and issuing its opinion. And they also issued a report and recommendation with a favorable finding that the recommendation that the city council approve the concept plan. This project requires concept plan approval from the city council. You will be required to hold a public hearing and schedule that when you think it's ready. It's not on your agenda for tonight, but if you are inclined, you could do so. I could verbalize a resolution at tonight's meeting for consideration if you wish to do so, or a hearing at your September 11th meeting. And after the issuance of the concept plan, the project goes back to the planning board so the planning board can issue the site plan. It's gone through this back and forth because your law requires review of a concept plan, and also by the planning board, and state law requires that the project have a secret review, and you determine that would be by the planning board. So generally the project is, again, vacant land, construction of a new 2-story, approximately 52,000 square foot building, which will have 30,000 square feet of commercial artist studios on the first floor, and then 28 one-bedroom loft apartments on the second floor, of which 3 will be the below market rate units, the BMR units. The project is located in the Fishkill Creek development, the FCD zoning district, as well as the historic district and landmark overlay district. The planning board and their review report dated July 25th, I'm going to read it because I think it's important to see the work that the planning board put into this in revising the project with the applicant. That during the board's review, the applicant modified the concept plan to make substantial improvements to the Greenway Trail, including increased landscaping and enhanced accessibility by the elimination of stairs that were previously proposed on the trail. In addition, the concept plan was modified to reduce the proposed amount of impervious surfaces, specifically in the area of proposed off-street parking. And the majority of the planning board is in support of reducing the required number of parking spaces from 95 to 80 based upon a shared parking analysis. In addition, the planning board is in favor of land banking an additional 14 parking spaces based on the anticipated interplay between this project, the new building, and the tenants of the neighboring developed parcel, whereby tenants of the neighboring parcel have expressed interest in renting the proposed art studios. Therefore, the planning board finds that 66 constructed parking spaces plus 14 land bank spaces, rather than the 95 required by the city zoning code, would be sufficient for the project. And then the board notes the board unanimously voted to approve the recommendation.
Nick, we're losing your audio.
Oh, okay,
Your
sorry.
audio is very muffled.
I apologize. So I just read the city council, the planning board's report recommendation report, which is in your agenda packet. Just want to briefly go through the negative declaration, which is also in your packet. And in there, the planning board goes through the required SECRA categories of potential impacts. The first being the impact on the land, and they note that 80% of the site will be maintained as open space, which is exceeds the 30% that is required under the zoning district regulation. They also note that it's presently vacant land that is not really vegetated, and that it's, again, a 3.5 acre parcel, and it will be improved with the Greenway Trail, which is existing, but it will be enhanced. There also is comments on the water and sewer, which SECRA requires be examined. And there's on page 3 goes through and notes that there will be steps taken to eliminate the stormwater inflow and infiltration, the I&I that is presently existing and coming into the municipal sewer system by removing an old clay sewer pipe. And also there are a number of improvements proposed to the sewer pump station that will eliminate odors that have been recommended by the city's engineer, and I understand agreed to by the applicant, so that will address some concerns. There's also a discussion on stormwater management and erosion and sediment control, because this is located near the Fishkill Creek, noting that there's an infiltration basin for water quality control. That there's a stormwater pollution prevention plan during construction that will be, as being reviewed and will be implemented. The negative declaration also notes the board reviewed the impact on flooding, that the property is located within the 100-year floodplain, and it does comply with the city's floodplain control law, and that the proposed buildings and structures are outside of a floodway, and proposed action will not increase the 100-year floodplain elevation by more than 1 feet. There's also a discussion on aesthetics resources, with the board finding it will not have a significant adverse environmental impact. The board notes that it reviewed the site plans and the detailed architectural elements, that the site is being preserved with 80% of it remaining as open space, and noting that the architecture is being designed consistent with the sort of the old mills and the adjoining buildings. On page 6, it goes through the archaeological resources and the review that was undertaken with the finding of no disturbance by the state and by the village or the city board. Also noting with respect to recreational that the enhancements and improvements to the Greenway Trail is a positive. And then on page 7, there's a commentary on the impact on transportation. And I understand there was a traffic report reviewed by the planning board, and some review letters and additional generated by the planning board's traffic consultant, and there were responses and some back and forth between as they flesh those issues out. But it was determined during the SECRA review by the planning board that the additional traffic to be generated coming out at the intersection of Route 52 and Mill Street, and also along Front Street, would not have a negative impact, and that it was adequate. And then there was also a discussion about the impacts to parking and the recommendation that it be reduced. So that's just an overview of some of the work that is the planning board took, which is contained in your packet. Also in your packet is the actual site plan, which I'll ask Arieh to just go through, walk the board through, and then I'll have some comments as well. You also have a memo from our office that walks you through what the requirements are for the city council to consider during its review of the concept plan. And that's in section 223-41.13F, as well as the development design standards in 223-41.13I. So tonight, the council should consider and ask any comments it wishes to make to the applicant for clarification of the concept plan, if there are any changes or additional information that you would request of the applicant, or if you think this is appropriate for scheduling of a public hearing so that you can receive comment from the planning board. That, Mayor, concludes my comments.
And Mayor, we have the architect here with a slide deck that
Okay.
has more visual representations.
All right, so absent any questions for Nick specifically, I would suggest Arieh you go ahead and then we can talk
Okay.
after that.
Yeah. Thanks, Nick. That was my presentation. Ben, if you could go to the next slide.
You get pretty pictures, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so what you're looking at now is the updated site plan. The basic configuration of the building is what we showed when we were here last August, but as Nick mentioned, the parking was greatly reduced. There was 95 spaces required per the zoning code, and between the shared parking analysis and land banking, we're down to 66 that would be constructed right away. And that allowed us to do some extra landscaping. We also have a full landscaping plan. Ben, if you skip ahead a couple until you hit the similar drawing there. And then one more. Yeah, so there's a full landscaping plan where we use that land bank area along with the other, vacant parts of the parcel. And it's a fully developed plan with eco-friendly planting. It doesn't need a lot of water. And also, I remember a question came up, it may have been from Dan, about the Indiana bat issue. One thing is that comes up on every project in Beacon because of the area, but we're only removing one tree on the whole 3.5 acre lot, so we're not going to have much effect on anything in terms of that. I think Nick covered a lot of it. We're also looking at doing some combination of either green roof or solar panels on the roof to, try to use that instead of just having, EPDM roof up there. And then I assume that this is going to fall under the all electric building requirements now. So, I think they were planning that anyway, but there's not going to be any gas or fossil fuels.
That is correct. It would be subject to the All Electric Building Act.
Right. And then otherwise, we fit all the zoning requirements so that we're not looking for any variances. We'll be working with the Architectural Review Board on tweaking the building design, but I think generally they were in favor of it. And then, so we're, if you have any questions, but we're hoping you're good with this further developed concept plan, and we can get back to the planning board to keep working on the site plan review.
Questions from council? Comments?
Can you talk a little bit more about the sewer odor control that was mentioned a couple times in the reports and what you're doing about that? And I think Councilmember Longno also brought it up just as maybe a general issue in that area.
Yeah, I know that was an issue. I'm not the engineer on the project, so I can't get into the specifics. But I know that. That's another thing. We have a pretty well developed engineering solution for the stormwater and for those issues. So I know that, you know, they're replacing that old clay pipe, which may have been part of it, and then there's some work in that little sewer building. But yeah, I can't get into specifics on that. But it's been addressed by, you know, by the applicant's engineer.
I had a follow-up question on the landscaping plan. Sorry if I just interrupted someone.
Go ahead.
No. Thank you for sharing the plant list. And I'm just curious if you could tell us more about the water management aspect of the landscaping, what paving you're planning to use on the parking spots that are there, and if there is a plan for ongoing runoff if we continue to have, you know, the heavy rain that we've been having this year, for example.
In terms of the paving of the parking lots, it's going to be a standard asphalt kind of paving, but like I mentioned, it's been significantly reduced. All the water that hits either the building or the impervious surface of the parking lot is being managed through that bioretention basin. So that's all been fully engineered as well.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say, remember, this is a concept plan for at the council level. Because the planning board was given the lead agency responsibility, they went into a lot of detail on soil and water and stormwater and floodplain and all those issues. But your approval is for concept plan, not for architecture or engineering details. That's supposed to be up to the subsequent site plan review, where all those things will be finalized. We haven't looked at the architecture yet, just sort of generally in terms of the renderings.
Right.
But the planning board will still do a thorough, complete review of all those engineering aspects as part of their site plan approval, which comes after the concept plan approval at the council level.
Right.
And John, that sort of goes to the interplay between site plan and concept plan review, because it does overlap a little bit. The council during concept plan review is required to take a look at the Fishkill Creek Development Design Standards in section I, which does go through architecture and some of the other traditional site plan issues. But I agree with you that it's not meant to dive into the details, but you know, if, for example, the building was proposed to be painted purple, that would be an appropriate item for the board to comment on. So you're looking at it more from a generalized viewpoint to make sure you think that the building's architecture matches and meets the intent of the Fishkill Creek Design District.
So yeah, I appreciate the reminder of our role in this, which is concept only. So that's pretty high level, right? So planning board's done seeker. They're going to do a detailed site plan. We could provide them some comments if we want, but ours is really that concept focus. And so I'm appreciative, Nick, of you saying, well, where do I look for concept criteria? And you're saying section I of the Fishkill Creek Development Zone. And so if I were to kind of stay at the conceptual level, artist live work is a great fit. Some commercial states, artist studio space, not live work, studio space, right? Or is it live work?
Ground floor is studio space, upper floor is live work.
Right, so it is a commercial and residential use. That certainly fits in our concept plan, our Fishkill Creek Development Zone. The particular mix looks attractive. Again, I look at the parking, and thankfully you've ended up with something less than what we would have required, because I would have said, geez. Again, I'm struggling to see what part of the concept I don't find attractive that I would want to comment on. And maybe there's criteria that we might want to consider. I didn't think about purple paint. It's a brick. It looks like a factory building, which is kind of the fundamental concept that we've got for FCD. It looks pretty good, my first reaction.
And it has a big front yard with a lot of green space between the building and the creek.
Yeah.
And also, for example, if there's any change to the concept plan of material, right, we have to be careful. Not everything requires it to come back, but some of it, if there's a change, if, for example, it's no longer brick, but it's aluminum siding or some other material that's permitted, but not brick, it would have to come back to the city council for concept plan review. One example of something that is traditional site plan is, for example, loading zones. There's a commercial space, but there's no loading zones shown or discussed. So how are moving trucks, how are commercial deliveries going to be made? If that resulted in a new driveway coming in through the floodplain of the back of the property, that would then have to come back to the city council because that is changing the concept plan, in my opinion. But it's a traditional site plan comment that would be discussed during the planning board review.
John or Ari, I'm interested to know, with the traffic study that was done, was there any discussion of the intersection of Route 52 and Mill Street? I think Nick mentioned it, but I'm actually not seeing it in the seeker report. I'm seeing more of the focus just on the Front Street area, so I didn't know if that came up at all.
Yeah, I think they looked at the intersection and the surrounding area. I don't recall any specific recommendations that they made in terms of changing that. I mean, there is that flashing yellow traffic light there. So it's red on the coming out of Mill Street and flashing yellow on 52. It came up at one point whether that should be, actually made into a working signalized traffic light, but I don't think they recommended going there at this point.
I think my memory goes back a bit on
Yeah.
this too, and I wasn't the traffic consultant, so I didn't review the traffic plan. But my memory, there's two changes. They agreed to redo Mill Street in
Yeah.
cooperation with the owner. That's a private street, but it's in terrible condition, and they agreed as part of this development to redo that street,
Yeah.
so that would be fixed up.
Yeah, they already did that work.
That happened.
Yeah.
There we go. And my memory is that the rehabilitation plan for Fishkill Avenue called for a fully activated signal there.
Yes, and that's now been taken out of the project.
And now that's been taken out of the project,
this
so
might
it was,
be
I think,
something that-
assumed that there would be a traffic light by the time this thing was built.
Right, yeah, that's why I bring it up, thinking of the
Yeah.
concept of ingress and egress,
Yeah.
which is listed there, if
Yeah.
that's just one thing that, for all intents and purposes, as you said, at the time it was like, oh, this project's going to take care of it, but now that isn't the case, and that happens to be the one point that both cars and pedestrians and pedestrians actually have to cross to the other side, because that's where the sidewalk is. So just that would be a great thing
Yeah.
to note for the planning board to
Right.
bring
Yeah,
back.
I think that makes sense, and I think when we stopped at the planning board a couple months ago, getting ready to come to the council, I don't think.
And what we've
the,
done on other concept plan applications is the city council has given a request list, if you will, of additional areas for the planning board to review during site plan review. And the planning board, I think, has found that helpful.
Great.
So I think in terms of the final site plan review, that will be looked at again as to
Right.
what changes might happen at the intersection.
And we just restriped that crosswalk, and I have our guys putting in those high visibility signs, but there could be other things that you do to make that even safer. Like if they wanted to reactivate the light, we're willing to work with them. If they want to put in ped heads, pedestrian activated signals, we're willing to work on that too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm there every day. My office is there, and there's not a lot of pedestrian crossing, but I think anything that adds to that safety factor is good. So I think it's probably a good idea to bring something like
Yeah,
that
and you're
up.
building out the site, and particularly knowing the future, as we've talked about it, of that corridor, of the rail trail going right across the top of
Right,
that.
yeah,
So I
yeah,
think it'd
there
be
would be
good to
more,
think
yeah.
about for your own residents,
Yeah.
if nothing else.
Yeah.
so.
And the requirements for Mill Street included crosswalks at the
Right.
site, at the lower end of the site, that aren't there now. So they will have drop curbs and crosswalks so that people can get up to the light.
Right, yeah,
Thereafter.
that's one thing we worked on during the planning process, is getting the pedestrian access, working better. But, yeah, I think going all the way across makes sense.
Yeah, when they started, you actually had to walk through the parking lot from Mill Street, and there were no crosswalks. So the planning board has gone into
Right,
a
yes.
certain amount of detail of how you get from 52 down to the site on sidewalks with ADA accessibility and the rest.
Great. And it's great to hear that the other owner of the property that kind of is in between yours and 52 is also on board with this and helping with it, so.
You know, he let the owner of this project, you know, give him some new roadway for free.
That's very generous of him.
Yeah.
One final point I want to discuss with the city council, and also have some request of the applicant, concerns the sewer pump station. So there is that separate smaller lot on the sewer pump station. Ben, if you could put that up on the screen, I think it's plan 2.
Sorry, Nick, which slide did you want up?
It's not on slide 2, slide 3 would be.
On the existing conditions?
Actually, you know what, I'm sorry, slide 5. And so there's a sewer pump station that services several properties at the Hip Lofts, and this property itself will be serviced by. The applicant is required to create what's called a transportation corporation because New York State wants to make sure when there's sewage facilities provided to multiple properties that there's not a dispute as to who is responsible for the maintenance of it. It's not being offered or maintained by the city, so it will be privately operated and maintained, and the transportation corporation has that responsibility and can then charge rates to the benefited property owners. And if we just zoom in, you'll see it's on the left-hand side of the screen where there's a small square. That's right above where Ben's cursor is. That's the property. And so the city will be required to council adopt a resolution authorizing the creation of the Transportation Sewer Corporation. Because under the state law, should that corporation fail to operate or maintain it, it then could be deemed abandoned and devolves onto the city. It becomes then the city's responsibility to run it and then charge appropriate fees to the benefited properties. And so as part of this concept plan, I would ask that the applicant, because there's no visual here showing how the sewer station, the pump station will be accessed. I don't see an access road. I don't see appropriate parking spaces. There would have to be an easement provided. And again, we can debate whether that's concept plan or site plan review, but since it's going to have to be approved by the city council, I would think we'd want to at least get some of those details fleshed out here. The applicant also would have to go to the Dutchess County Department of Health to get approval for the Transportation Corporation. I don't see any issues with it. It's just some steps that need to go forward, and I think there's a benefit to getting some clarity at the outset.
Thanks for calling that out, Nick. I see it's right next to the Greenway Trail and not that far from the creek. So I'm curious what it means by pump house, like how big and how loud this thing is. I'm not familiar with pump houses, so more detail about that would be useful.
Yeah, I mean, that's an existing structure, so.
Oh, it's already there?
Yeah.
I gather that our input to the planning board on taking care of that would be what we would do with that information?
Yeah, there's upgrades that are needed for that pump station in order for this to tap into it. And
I agree, Mayor, but I would want, because as part of the concept plan, I think you'd want to see especially because the city council may have to at some point take this over in 10 years, 20 years, hopefully never. You would want to see as part of this concept plan, how is that building going to be accessed for service as well as parking for it?
Thank you.
I don't think that's a big lift, but I agree some of the more engineered details we can list and provide, but defer to the planning board.
Okay.
We do get regular comments about the smell from the pump station. It's about the size of a garage, about a 2-car garage. It's an old brick building. It looks like it's in some dishevelment.
it's overgrown.
And we haven't, really fully fleshed out what's going on there.
Great. And who
I can
owns it
provide you
now?
with,
Nick, does the city own it, or is that part of why it's in its current state?
it's privately
Privately
owned.
owned.
It's not proposed to be owned by the city, it's privately owned. And there are some engineering review comments, and also on page 3 of the planning board's negative declaration, they go in and recite some suggested recommendations which the applicant has accepted from the city's engineer as to how to improve the pump station and address the odors. And I'll call that out for the council and provide you with that information.
Okay, so what you're saying, Nick, is comments like, please address, the current state and where it's going to be, including, noise or whatever, would go to planning board as a comment for them to take into consideration for their site plan. But the concern of if this corporation goes belly up, are we okay taking that because that could be considered part of the concept plan?
That's correct, yes. How does this pump station interact with the concept plan and the proposed construction
Yeah, okay.
of the new building?
Yeah, there was some dialogue with the city engineer about, we had more landscaping around that building, and we removed some of that to ease the access to it. We could look into that further during the planning process, but we're setting up for that being accessible and easy to manage.
Arya, can you describe a little bit more about the external lighting plan for the property and the parking lots?
Yeah, we're basically providing LED parking lot lights, so there's adequate parking for people to park and find their way back to the building. It's all shielded, so none of it's going to go onto other properties. Especially with the LED, they're very directable, and you can sort of customize the shielding. So they should basically provide a glow at night in the parking lot.
Are they full cutoff?
Yeah, they will be. Yeah.
All right, so the
What does
light-
that mean?
It means the light goes down. It doesn't go up or create glare to other
Right.
buildings.
It's
Yeah,
required
they're-
by
they're-
the
waterways.
city.
Yeah.
There's the new lighting standards require full cutoff,
Yeah, dark
lower
sky compliant.
foot candles,
Yeah.
and no glare off-site.
Great. And again,
certain temperatures.
And even the height, right? If you have a lower height, you
There's
generally
variable heights
have
for pedestrian areas and parking lots.
Okay.
But there's color temperature requirements so that you don't get the bright blue lights or the amber lights.
And in terms of our next step, I don't think we have to end our questions about the site, whether are conceptual ones or whether ones that involve topics that we might refer to the planning board for their consideration. But is one of our next steps a public hearing? And should we, would we be, as a council, prepared to set a public hearing without ourselves closing off our own discussion on this topic?
yes.
Would that be okay?
Yeah,
I'm okay with that.
And do we have a target date in mind?
I think the 11th is our next public meeting, is that what you said?
Yeah, it's our next voting
Yeah.
meeting.
Okay. Are we okay with that? And again, does not close off our questions or considerations.
Yes.
We can, that's enough time to notice it.
Okay?
Yeah, we
That's
can
right.
add it to our voting part of tonight.
Okay.
And I just want to say, I think the landscape list is amazing.
Yeah.
Yes.
The wide array of native plants and trees that you have is appreciated.
And then just for the record, I would put both John, your memo to us is a positive recommendation, and the planning board's letter to us is the same, right? For our conceptual plan approval.
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you very much.
Okay?
Thank you.
And again, we'll probably have to do another workshop on conceptual conversations. Sorry, you may be coming back to us to help answer some more questions, but we're good with at least setting up the public hearing component next.
Yeah, I'll wait to hear.
Okay, good, thank you. And not to push them out the door, but it's 5 to
out the
9.
door.
And so let's do 5 other items on our workshop, and let's even get to a council meeting. So there's the appointment of 3 people, Heidi Harrison, Akira Semino, and Sandro Cabrera, to Assistant Recreation Director, a Recreation Assistant, and you should talk about those first, and I'll stop on the Motor Equipment Operator. So, Chris, would you tell us about those first 2?
Yeah, so we have Mark Price, our Director of Recreation, with us tonight, who's can talk more about this. But these are 2 changes that we've envisioned for a while. One is a promotion for Heidi, and the other is the hiring of someone who's been with us for many years on a seasonal and part-time basis. So, Mark, can I ask you to talk about your colleague?
Briefly.
Yeah, so, hi, everyone.
Briefly, right? Briefly.
Yep. So Heidi currently works for the Recreation Department under the title of Recreation Assistant. What we found over the last several years is her responsibilities and duties have changed to a point where we sort of looked at our structure and it makes sense to promote her to an assistant director, and it'll match her sort of responsibilities. It also allows us then to backfill that recreation assistant position with somebody that's worked with us seasonally year-round for the last 3 years, but since 2017 in the summer setting, in a part-time capacity, but that would bring her on board year-round full-time. Both of those things would allow us to sort of take steps in the direction of what our recreation study has pointed to as sort of growth and a change to programmings or expansion to programmings, mostly by freeing my desk up to do some higher level work and kind of increasing our bandwidth on the day-to-day with an additional full-time employee. So basically tidying up the house and adding one more full-time year-round employee.
Mark, can you give a couple of more specific examples, just a sentence or two, about the kinds of things that having additional staff and promoting Heidi would help you to look into or accomplish?
Yep, I mean, Heidi's job responsibilities will now match the title more so, but she would be responsible, for as we grow our recreation center or change our recreation center, she would be sort of a facility manager. Most importantly, having Kira around full time will allow us to very soon expand our after-school program. In addition, hopefully create a little more bandwidth to expand upon our summer programming for the most part.
So we have 3 after-school programs, but there's more demand than supply. This would allow us towards the end of the year to open a 4th site at the community center for 4th and 5th graders, and then do the other 3 for 1st, 2nd kindergarten.
Yeah, K through 3 at
K
the
through
3
3.
current sites. And we've already permitted we spent the summer months acquiring the permits from the Office of Child and Family Services.
And we'll talk more about this when we get into budget in early October, but we're going to also propose to add another session to summer camp. So, we keep throwing things on Mark's plate, and I'm very clear that he probably could have used this additional staff person a year ago. We were holding it up just because of we were finishing our community facility and program report, and that only reiterated that people are looking for more services, better facilities. This will help free Mark up too to work on major capital projects that we have coming up. We're going to be doing resurfacing of the lots at South Avenue. We're going to do a major overhaul of Riverfront Park, Pete and Toshi Seeker. We're doing the We Play area of Memorial Park this fall. So there's quite a bit that we need to get queued up, and we thought this was a good time to do it.
And Kara will actually be our 4th site coordinator for the after-school program. So she'll come in a little bit earlier, help out with some general recreation stuff, and then transition to a site director for the 4th after-school site.
So my only comment when I heard this was, okay, so that will require a budget amendment for this year, which I don't think I'm too worried about. Are we good?
We're good. Yeah,
Okay.
so Heidi's position was already budgeted for, and we have remaining funds in another rec fund. So I think we're good, but we'll come back to you if we,
You got to do a transfer, or?
yeah, but it's salary to salary.
Yeah,
I think
okay.
we're okay.
But then my other comment was, okay, but if we're shifting a position from part-time to full-time, that just means when we do the overall budget, we've just got to make sure we've got room in there and that we're not affecting our, tax rate in an inappropriate fashion. I view it as an appropriate priority, but we just got to make sure it fits, that's all.
Yes.
Okay.
We're confident it will.
Yeah.
And then, thank you.
Mhm.
And then we are also proposing the appointment of Sandro Crabera for the motor equipment operator position. He has been he's worked on doing snow plowing and paving, and he has experience with all of the machinery that we use. So we finally, this is the last MEO position we have open, and we're excited to fill it.
And just to confirm, everybody good with those 3 appointments?
Yeah, great.
Yeah, great.
All right, good. Okay, you want to talk to us about curb ramps bids, Chris?
Yes. As part of our yearly milling and paving, we use our CHIPS funding, which is federal funds for redoing local streets. And when we mill and pave streets, we also have to put in accessible curb ramps so that people with limited mobility and people in wheelchairs can access those curbs. We had in the areas that we are looking to mill and pave, and a couple other that we identified that we really needed to do, we came up with a list of 30 curb ramps. Those are in your packet in a memo from the superintendent of streets. We did put that out to bid, and originally, you'll remember last year we bid these and they came in really high, and we only had a few, so we did them in-house. But they were coming in at about $10,000 a piece. Our low bid was actually from Contech Construction Technology for just over $6,000 a piece. So we might have gotten some economy of scale by having this many more. Our engineer has reviewed the bid and is proposing to award it to Contech Construction Technology in the amount of $189,292. And we did have 2 other bids.
So the thought is that the bid came in significantly lower than the rest of the bids because it's such a large scope of work as opposed to just like a handful of curbs.
Yeah. I mean, that probably is one of the factors. It's also timing might be a little better than when we did it last year.
Next year, our goal is to get within 50,000 of the actual bids that get in one of these years.
Well, this helps us pave more road.
Yeah.
You know, whatever we don't use on the curb ramps, we can use for the milling and paving.
I saw that the Beekman at the Metro North stairs is one of the, or 2 of them that are being proposed, and I was curious too, if part of that, there's also a discussion of maybe moving, 'cause I think that parking space, the thing that Metro North has is in the middle of
Yes.
the crosswalk, just to kind of, if they have the room, just to shift it so it's not there.
Our superintendent has had conversations with them about them removing the 2 parking spaces on either side of the crosswalk. The crosswalk was just redone, but it accentuated to us that it's not accessible in any manner.
Mhm.
So we are going to put in accessible curb ramps there, thinking ahead that at some point we're going to come back and either do a full-on comprehensive redo of the road, or we'll do a milling and paving.
Great. Speaking too of that, it might have already been done, and sorry, I haven't driven down this road in a while, but with the new crosswalk, the Cross and Verplank, I see is another intersection. I don't know if that crosswalk has been repainted or is on the list to be repainted too this year. And it might have already have been repainted, to be fair. I haven't been down there
I know we did
in
a
a while.
bunch last week.
Okay, oh great, it might have been done then already.
Any other questions on this one? So the last one's also related to this, which is you need a supplemental revenue agreement regarding pedestrian signal development project, and you're going to tell us why we can't use DOE for one thing for DOE for another thing, right?
That's one way of saying it, but
I have the right topic at least, right?
You do.
Okay.
So you'll recall last year we finished a project to do the bump outs on Main Street, and it was associated with a pedestrian improvement project, which installed 4 pedestrian countdown timers and reconfigured the entire traffic light at Wolcott and South Avenue. We came under budget for the bump out, and that was TAP funding, Transportation Alternatives Program, and we went over budget on the signals. What the mayor is referring to is DOT wouldn't let us take the money that was left over in the TAP because it was a dedicated source and put it into the signals. So we were $222,000 short. Before I closed out the project, I asked the county if there were any other mechanisms they could use to backfill this money for us. As part of the, some of the Inflation Reduction Act had money in it for the carbon reduction program. It's the first year we've had these monies. The county let me know. We were the only one to put in an application, so we got the 200, we got 80% of the 222.
Well done.
We just have to do this kind of pro forma resolution with DOT. They'll put it on the state transportation improvement program. The project's already done. The bills are already paid. All it does is it allows us now to send them a bill for $177,800 and get that back. So it's just, we're doing paperwork. And thank you.
You're welcome.
Otherwise, good.
Yes, that explains questions I had, so thank you.
So I'm going to call the workshop to an end if everyone's okay with that, and then take 5 minutes and then do a council meeting starting at 9:10. Is that okay? It's 9:05 right
Great.
now?
Yep.
Everybody need a break? Okay, thank you. Okay.
Lee, did you get the list of speakers?
I haven't yet. All right, thank you. All right, so it's 9:10. It's already late for folks, and I apologize for you all having to wait as long as you have, but thank you very much. This is the formal meeting, so I'll just call the formal meeting to order, and we'll start with a Pledge of Allegiance. So I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay. Let me do a formal roll call now. Molly, are you here?
Yes.
Justice, are you here?
Yes.
George? Yes. Ren?
Yes.
Lee's here. Paloma, are you here?
I'm here.
All right, so we actually did a roll call tonight. And Dan Amar Blair is excused. He's out of the country. And that's our roll call. So first is our first opportunity for public comment. If you would like an opportunity to speak on any subject of your choice for up to 3 minutes, now is the time to do it. I have 2 people on the sign-up sheet, so we'll take them first. Teresa Kraft.
Change of weather for sure. Good evening. Walking in tonight without rushing, I took a look at the planters, excited to see what's growing. One pot was empty, and the other pot had one giant weed. In the same vein, last week I took guests down to the Riverfront Park, and their opinion echoed my internal thoughts. Disgusting. Old litter and overgrown. Thank God Scenic Hudson takes care of their green spaces, because tourists think Beacon is doing a good job. In truth, our streets are in dire need of TLC. They're overgrown with weeds, scrub trees, and old trash. Beacon has not looked this neglected in years, maybe never. Reading tonight's agenda and supplemental materials, I'm not sure why the city would frivolously throw out the book and infringe mass build-out development in every neighborhood and zoning district. Beacon should not be gelled into a bedroom community with dorm living. This city has spent decades fine-tuning its zoning district and codes. Beacon does not need to copycat every other municipality in the world. Just like the electric car bandwagon, that grandiose idea is backfiring. It's a fact history has a way of repeating itself, and we will see larger families and more family cars, and you'll have to shoehorn it all back in. We recently saw the Prophecy Theater get pushed through. Board members were speaking out on one side of their mouth saying no, and the other side were swayed to vote yes. 2 years of public outcry and public hearings on a night when a few long-standing planning board members were absent, the chairman rushed it through. It was obvious to all that nobody was allowed to talk their mind. Now we find the developers purchase other properties right across the street to develop into their project. The public has never really heard the real facts. Tonight, the planner proposed building low-income housing on Fishkill Avenue, across from the Hamilton Fish Housing Complex, on unsuspecting property owners' land. At the last PB planning public hearing, a neighbor who lives across the street objected to looking at cars coming and going all day and lights 24/7 from a large infill building next to that very lot that the planner mentioned tonight. She was told by the lawyer of the developer that if the neighbor agreed, they'd install a large green wall on her property. Why should residents lose their quality of life and be fenced in? Last workshop, you talked about how you had an idea for infill buildings, maybe working with Dutchess County DMV lot, only to read it in the next few days in the paper that the meeting had already taken place the week before. I am convinced that everything that comes to the council table is a done deal before it's presented to the residents. The same council who have nothing to report about
15
in their
seconds.
wards because everybody's busy on their own agendas. This is not what any of us imagined would become of our hometown city. I went to the recent Fishkill Town Board meeting, and they're more worried and concerned for the Beacon residents. They don't want to have a build-out
Your
next
time
to
is
that
elapsed.
Route 84 interchange that will negatively impact the residents of Beacon. That language is missing here.
Thank you. Clark, Kevin?
Good evening. So, 2 Wilson Street, 20-year resident. And this idea that segmentation doesn't apply to the project discussed earlier tonight, the Lofts project, is ripe for contest in front of a judge. There are several problems with this project. One is it's been presented that the structure incorrectly by the attorney isn't on the floodway. It is. 2 is that the dam is part of this assemblage of properties that was previously approved and before the planning board creates a circumstance by which the true owners of the dam haven't been identified. The liability for the dam failure has not been discussed or quantified, nor has the impact on the city in terms of any potential polluted sedimentation that's at the base of the dam behind the wall. So there's an environmental concern. There is a larger concern as it relates to the Wolcottville, which was laid out in the late 1800s, commonly known as Liberty Street, Wilson Street, which was laid out in 50-foot wide lots. And the remnants today are many homes on that street where there's 50-foot available for further development should families find that it's within their means to do so, which is a whole other topic on affordable housing development. But most importantly, the sewage station, which I've only been over there twice, and the one time I was over there, I actually videotaped the alarm going off, and it was in a state of failure. Of course, it's going to create odors. But when you double the capacity, when you add 200 homes, then you eliminate the ability of Liberty Street and Wilson Street and the neighbors on that side of the creek to develop land potentially because the sewers are at full capacity. Or maybe they're at overcapacity because you have no comprehension as to that 10 or 12-inch pipe that goes across the Fishkill Creek that then services further downstream every single residence on that side of the creek. And so the engineering studies have to be more than just can the pump station work, but what effect does it have on the odors coming up to the sewer manholes and also put potential backups of every single house sewer in that neighborhood?
Thank you so much. Is there anyone else in the public arena who'd like to speak? Come on up. Tell us who you are, where you live.
Rachel Rifkin, River Ridge. I was not, did not coordinate with Teresa. My outfit, I was not even coming here to speak.
Speak into the mic so we can all.
I was not even coming here to speak, but I was listening in. And yes, I think you should either tell us a deal is done or not to the public, because I have spent 2 years against 113 Walcott Avenue, Prophecy Theater, and that was gunned in. And I keep always on the mic, I say I'm short, which I am. But I bought a Beacon to stay. But now I'm thinking, like, should we just do fire sales here? Like, get out? Because what is Beacon now? Are we saturated? And why even have public hearings if it's a done deal? Because I do walk these streets, and I'm one of those people that doesn't have, we have one car, but I walk most of the time. So what are we becoming? As stated, I left New York for a reason, and you're talking about bikes and trees and all this. Why don't we get the illegal bikes off the streets before we start trying to imagine this beautiful greenery or whatever it is? I don't know. That's it. And again, I don't know how 113 Walcott got through, but it had to go through you. And I would like to know what the use of a church is, if they're allowed to use that as a church currently. What does that mean? They're allowed weddings? How are we going to govern this? Because you're changing everything in today's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the physical public want to say something? This is your opportunity to do so. So Ben, is there anyone on the online portion of our meeting that would like to make a public comment?
If you're on Zoom and you'd like to make a comment, please use the raise hand option at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you're joining us by phone, you can press *9. If you're watching on YouTube, you will need to join the Zoom by visiting beaconny.gov. And right now we have no attendees in the Zoom room.
Okay. So let's do reports of council. Where do we want to start? Ren, you want to start on your end? And we'll work your way
Sure.
around? Okay. Thank you.
Short report today. Just wanted to highlight for everyone that there are affordable housing applications on the city website offered by Hudson River Housing for the Edgewater Workforce Housing applications, and for Dutchess County Rebuilding Together, Dutchess County applications are available. My office can be opened for anyone at any time. Just reach out to me at wlongno@beaconny.gov. Thanks.
George?
No report this evening.
I also have nothing to report this evening.
And I just wanted to quickly share that for those who remember, we talked about the Tompkins Terrace renovation, and that is moving forward. They are close to getting, I think, all their funding squared away, and as such, they're going to have a meeting for the residents this coming Wednesday. If you are a resident there and would like more details about it, or have any questions or concerns you want to share with me and either cannot make those meetings or just don't feel like sharing, you can feel free to reach out to me at mrhodes, RHODES, @beaconny.gov. And I'll pass it to you, Lee.
Okay. So I'll be brief. Just for the record, I believe that I once met on phone with a potential purchaser of the church, not the actual purchaser. And as far as I can tell, I have never had a meeting with the current owners of the church down the street. I live, for those of you who aren't sure, directly in the neighborhood of this church. All right, I am 3 doors down the street on Route 90. And the concept that somehow I'm involved in some done deal on something that affects my neighborhood and my home directly is just utterly contrary to knowing where I live and knowing what I do for a living and knowing the professional way that I care to run this city. I also was a history major in college. I don't believe in the conspiracy theories of history. And generally speaking, there are a few that actually occur. But just for the record, if people think it's a done deal, that's all great. Think whatever you wish, but it's been sitting in the planning board for how many meetings and how many hearings and how many, concerns and how many adjustments were made to go through that particular one. And I can respect, and I've talked to many of my neighbors about the concerns they have. I have similar ones. They aren't dramatically different than those raised. Whether I think there should be no development whatsoever, which wouldn't be legal for that church, or whether this is an appropriate development, was properly left to the planning board. It is within their authority. The zoning for that particular property is identical to the zoning for many of the properties in that neighborhood because we all survived urban renewal. Urban Renewal was expecting all of the properties of the historic homes to be torn down. My particular house, which sits on just over an acre, was zoned for 15 apartments. What a disaster that would have been. We protected those homes. We applied the same zoning to the church. The zoning for all of those are R140 historic overlay. The historic overlay permits additional uses. For something like a church, which, as everyone can understand, has the direct use of a house of worship have gone down significantly over the years, and as you can tell, many churches are looking for alternative uses. If we want that structure, which sits on the historic register, had Frederick Douglass preach from it, that if we want to preserve it, we have to permit additional uses. That's a tough call in a neighborhood that has homes, including my home, but the zoning is what governs that. We entrust the decision of fit of neighborhood to the planning board, and I just want to say that my hats are off, and I'm thankful for all of the effort of those volunteers who put in an immense amount of time, not just on this issue, but on many, many issues. And it's a tough, tough job that we have for them, because they have to figure out how to balance and make things work, given the zoning that's given them. So I just wanted to add that. Again, I'm ever thankful for their involvement. I'm truly appreciative of all of the input that's been provided, not on that particular proposal, but on anyone that comes to the planning board. It's a tough call that everyone has to make. These boards make tough choices, and I trust them a great deal, and I'm thankful for their time. I am thankful for the input of the community. We make decisions and we move on. So that's all I just wanted to add personally. Thank you. Chris, do you have anything you want to add as administrator?
I just want to close the loop on two resolutions you did earlier this year. This council passed Resolution 36 in April and Resolution 65 in May, opposing the release of radioactive water into the Hudson River. I'm happy to report that the governor signed the bill restricting discharges of radioactive waste. So that was passed by both the Senate and the Assembly and is now signed by the governor. And that's all I have.
Does Paloma have a report?
Pardon?
Does Paloma have a report?
Oh, Paloma is still on.
I'm so sorry.
Yes, me too.
Paloma, I apologize.
All right, Chris.
Forgot you were there.
Chris stole my report, but I'm kidding. I'm
Tell
also
them about
very
the
excited
firehouse. You can have the firehouse.
very excited that the governor has signed that bill, and it is completely law as well. And I will otherwise just say that I will be restarting my office hours in September, but I am reachable via my email address and phone number, which are on the city website. Thanks.
Thanks, and I apologize again to having listened to me talk for as long as I did without getting your comments in, so thank you. Okay, we have local laws and resolutions. You might be surprised to recognize the ones that we just discussed. So the first one is I'm looking for a motion and a second to appoint Heidi Harrison to the position of Assistant Recreation Director.
Motion.
Second.
So that's Justice and Molly. Any discussion? Again, I think we're making this from a part-time position to a full-time position.
No, Heidi is getting a promotion.
Oh, okay.
The other is.
Okay,
Yes.
sorry. So this is a promotion, and her current role, title is?
Is recreation assistant, which
Got it.
is the person that is next to be voted
Will
would
be filling that. Okay. So we're creating the position of Assistant Recreation
Yes,
Director.
the second position. So this is essentially the same position as you have with Nate.
Thank you.
And so Mark will have basically two lieutenants, one who deals with programs, the other who deals with facilities and ordering and procurement.
Got it. Thank you for that, that description. Anything else? Comments?
I've worked with the Recreation Department a lot in and outside of this role, and I think Heidi's really wonderful, and this is well-deserved, and I'm very happy for her.
Okay.
Any other comments? Okay, so all in favor of appointing Heidi Harrison to the position of Assistant Recreation Director signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. So the second one is appointing Kira, is it Simino?
Simino.
To the position of Recreation Assistant, recently opened by the elevation of Heidi Harrison to Assistant Recreation Director. Can I get a motion and a second?
Motion?
Second.
So Ren and Justice. And anything you want to add on that, Chris, that we didn't discuss a few minutes ago?
No, just that we have this perfect candidate who's done almost everything to be done in recreation. She's done after-school programs and camp, and we're just happy to hire her before someone else steals her away.
Without hearing no further discussion, all in favor of appointing Kira Simino to the position of Recreation Assistant, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay.
I would just ask, Mayor, that as Paloma is attending virtually, that you just call her out separately so it is appropriately reported in the minutes.
So let me just check. In the last two votes, Paloma, can I just, I thought I heard you say yes, but I just want to confirm that.
Yes, it was an enthusiastic aye for both of these positions.
Okay, thank you so
Really
much.
excited that Mark is getting support.
All right. And Nick, thank you for the reminder. The third one, I'm looking for a motion and a second to appoint Sandro Cabrero to Motor Equipment Operator.
Motion?
Second.
So I'll do George and Ren. You all were at the same time. Any discussion on those, on that one? Okay. And you promised to stop bringing MEOs to us for approval? You
No.
got them all now? You're going to bring some more?
Well, if
If we need to, right?
this is a very tight job market, so
Yeah.
if they stop leaving, I'll stop bringing new candidates to
Okay.
you.
Yeah, I understand.
The other option is to hire candidates who we don't really like and no one else likes, but I appreciate the thing to bring in the best people we can. And
All right. All right, then all in favor of appointing Sandra Cabrera to the position of Motor Equipment Operator signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I'll specifically ask for that from Paloma.
Aye.
Thank you. And I will also vote aye. Anyone opposed? Not hearing any. That one's approved. The next one is awarding a contract for 2023 accessible curb ramps. Can I get a motion and a second on that?
motion.
And so that's Molly
Second.
and Justice. And Chris, will you remind us just what we just discussed, but just for the record?
Yes.
What we're doing here?
So this is to award a bid to Contech Construction Technology Incorporated in the amount of $189,292 to install 30 ADA accessible curb ramps, mostly in relation to streets that we're going to be milling and paving. And this is part of the funding requirement for this federal funding, is that as you go through, you have to start making your sidewalk system more accessible. So this is for the replacement of 30 curbs, and that is in the agenda packet if you're wondering what curbs are being upgraded.
Okay, any further discussion? All right, so all in favor of awarding this contract on curb ramps, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Paloma?
Aye.
Thank you so much. Anyone opposed? Not hearing any. That one's approved unanimously. And then finally, we're looking for a motion and a second to authorize the city administrator to execute a supplemental revenue agreement for the installation of pedestrian signal development.
Motion.
Second.
So that was Molly and Paloma. And Chris, did you want to add anything on that authorization?
No, just the work has been done. The project has been billed out. We had a shortfall. We went back to the DOT asking for additional funds. We applied for carbon reduction program money and were granted 80% of our shortfall. So this is basically just paperwork housekeeping at this point so that we can seek reimbursement for the 80%.
Okay. And then are you going to have to come to council for the 20%?
No,
You've got funds for that too?
in the capital funds.
Got it.
yeah.
All right. Any further discussion on that? All right, all in favor of authorizing the city administrator to execute this supplemental revenue agreement, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Paloma?
Aye.
All right, so I hear unanimous support. I didn't hear any nays. So that's also approved. It's now 9:30. It's taken us.
Mayor, the next resolution was added to the agenda on consent by the council during the workshop, and it's resolution number 94, which I can read, as I'm not sure everyone has had a chance to see it updated in their link. And the resolution reads, setting a public hearing for the Hip Lofts and Studios concept plan. Be it resolved that the city council hereby schedules a public hearing for September 11th, 2023 at 7 p.m. for the Hip Loft and Studios concept plan.
Okay.
Motion? Do we motion that in, Nick?
So let me ask,
Yes,
do
that
we
would be
need to
correct.
add it to the agenda, or is it okay to do it directly?
It's okay because during work session, you all agreed to add it to the agenda, and Ben has quickly added it. Thank you, Ben.
Very good. So let's can I get a motion in a second? I think, Molly, you were doing the motion.
Second.
All right, and Ren is doing the second. Okay. So this is not approving a concept plan. It's saying that we had a discussion on a concept plan for the next phase of the Hip Lofts, and we're merely scheduling a public hearing to receive input. This, we will reserve the right to have further discussions on our concept plan vote and whether we bring that forward. Is that okay, everyone? All right. Any further discussion on that? And this is for September 11th, right?
Correct.
All right. All in favor of that particular motion, say aye.
Aye.
And then Paloma?
Aye.
All right. And any nays? Not hearing any. That one carries unanimously. Now can we get to the minutes? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Nick. So I need a motion and a second to approve the minutes of August 7th.
Motion.
I will make a second on the minutes. I'm so excited. Any additions, subtractions, deletions?
Right at the end, I think we need to go into executive session before we come out of executive session. I believe that's usually separate in the minutes. Nick, can you confirm where
That is
that
correct.
has to be?
That is, yes, and that is correct. It should be separately designated, yes.
Okay. And I think we went in for legal advice. I can't quite remember.
Litigation.
That is correct, yes.
Litigation, yeah.
Okay, so making
Thank
that one change, anything else? And we get score points for Molly for both reading and providing a couple of changes. Any others? All right, so all in favor of approving the minutes of August 7th, say aye.
Aye.
Paloma?
Aye.
Thank you so much. Anyone opposed? Hearing none, they're approved unanimously. We have our second opportunity for public comments. Anyone who didn't speak at the first opportunity, you're certainly welcome to speak now. There are two people in the public audience who may wish to speak if they like or not. Seeing head nods in the left and right as opposed to the up and down, I'll take that as a no. Is there anyone in the online portion of the meeting, Ben, who may wish to make a public comment?
Nobody online, Mayor.
Okay. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I just want to make a note that we don't have a meeting next week. Our next workshop meeting will be September 5th, which is a Tuesday after the Labor Day holiday.
All right.
So you have off next week.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Ren and Molly, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Aye.
Paloma, thank you. And everyone have a very good evening.
Thank you,
Meeting's
Nick.
adjourned.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
You're welcome.